Good morning, Scallywags. Spoo here, and I apologize now if I look and sound more terrible than usual. I went to OzCon this past weekend, had a fantastic time, but I've caught a bit of the con crud, so I'm running a fever of about 102 right now. I've got the heat cranked up in the house, trying to get the fever to break, and it's trying to, so I'm sweating profusely. And also, there's a tornado warning outside, so you may hear sirens and thunder, or the house blowing down around me or something. But we're doing this anyway. It has now been 1 week since the release of Avengers Endgame, and upon seeing it, something was bothering me, but I couldn't put my finger on what specifically it was. The more time that has passed, however, I've come to realize that movie kinda sucked. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't hate it, I just didn't love it. It's got so many problems that it just is eating my brain, and I am a cynical, horrible human being, so I have to share these things with you. Now, obviously, if you have not seen Avengers Endgame, there's going to be a lot of spoilers here, so avert your eyes, or unless you're like me and spoilers don't bother you, then hey, stick around. And I'm going to try to squash as much as I can into one video. Hopefully I don't want to make a part 2 to this. So there's going to be some weird editing and stuff in this, so just bear with me. Now, before we move forward, let's actually look back at Infinity War. Props to the Russo brothers on some extremely well done storytelling here. With that many characters and that much stuff going on, and yet somehow every scene, every line of dialogue pushed the plot forward. Every character had an arc. Sure, the movie had its problems, but those problems were so small that you could look past them and just pretend they weren't there. Avengers Endgame is pretty much the opposite of that. Let's start with some of the smaller things like Captain Marvel. Now, originally Marvel wanted Captain Marvel to show up in Infinity War, but the Russos felt that there were too many characters and too much going on already that they didn't want to put some other character in there and try to introduce her in a way that didn't make audiences go, wait a minute, who's this chick and why is she so powerful all of a sudden? So they decided to wait until Endgame. This gave them time to put out the Captain Marvel movie, so we can introduce her, give her some backstory, let people understand who she is and how she does what she does. If you haven't seen Captain Marvel, specifically the after-credits scene of Captain Marvel, then you may be a little bit lost as to how she knows who the Avengers are, because we do not recap that in this already 3-hour-long movie. Problem number 1 is that having Captain Marvel be there at all was kind of pointless. So the movie kicks off, you've got Nebula and Tony, they're adrift in space, they're about to die. It's been 22 days since the snap. Tony is recording his goodbye to Pepper. He says that they're going to run out of oxygen in the morning, and then that's it. He even lays down to go to sleep, presumably for the last time. But then, of course, Captain Marvel shows up to save the day. She carries the ship all the way back to Avengers HQ, and then she's like, well, let's go get Thanos. And in between there, Cap and Tony actually have a conversation that is probably my favorite scene of the whole movie, where Tony is basically like, give it up, we failed, it's over, it's done, move on. Greatest scene in that whole movie, by the way. But I digress. So Captain Marvel's like, well, let's go find Thanos and let's kill him. Nebula says she knows where he is. So they travel to this place called the Garden, and they find Thanos, where he explains that he actually destroyed the stones 2 days ago, and it's over, it's done with, you can't reverse it, done deal. Thor goes for the head and chops Thanos' head off. The end. If only. Cut to a scene that says 5 years later, and Black Widow is talking to some of the teams that are off doing things around the world. We see Okoye mentioning some earthquakes coming from the oceans under Wakanda, which may be a Namor reference, because Namor attacked Wakanda and started a war there, but I don't know. Maybe, hopefully, could be, I don't know, we'll see. Anyway, Captain Marvel is like, yeah, that stuff's going on all over the place, so I'm out of here. And she leaves. And we don't see her again until about the last 10 minutes of the movie. So she does all of nothing. My second small problem has to do with Thor. Now, at some point along the way, they decided that Thor is better suited as a comedic character. I don't have a problem with this. Ragnarok was one of the most fun Marvel movies that's come out so far, in my opinion. I don't know if you can hear that thunder happening outside, but it's pretty gnarly looking out there. However, in this movie, they amped that up to 11. He's got the big beer gut. He's an alcoholic. He's living in New Asgard, which is in Norway, and there's just a few of them living in this village, and he's just playing video games with Korg and Meek, and just a total slob, and I don't know. That doesn't get turned around at any point. He stays this fat, blubbering idiot through the whole movie. And I have a huge problem with that. Granted, that is just a nitpicky problem, but nonetheless. Also, they call him the Big Lebowski at one point, which means that the Big Lebowski is a movie that takes place in this universe. It exists as a movie in this universe. And that movie starred Jeff Bridges, who was also Obadiah Stane in Iron Man. Anyway, back to the big problems. So, boom. So anyway, back to the big problem. It is now 5 years later, and we cut to Ant-Man's van in this storage facility. A rat crawls across the control panel, conveniently bringing him out of the quantum realm. I'm willing to let that go. So Ant-Man is wandering around the streets trying to figure out what has happened. He actually finds a memorial for the Vanished. And there's some X-Men Easter eggs in those names that they show on the memorial, by the way. But he also finds his own name. So he makes his way back to his house where he finds his daughter and sees she's all grown up. And then he has a thought. So he rushes back to Avengers HQ where he explains to them, yes, it's been 5 years, but to me, I was in the quantum realm for 5 hours. We can use that somehow. So they decide to look into time travel. We can go back. We can stop Thanos from ever collecting the stones. Everyone comes back and the universe is happy and whatever. So, of course, they go to Tony Stark to help them with time travel. But he's married to Pepper, he's living out in the wilderness now, he has a daughter who's really cute, and of course he wants nothing to do with it, and he tells them it's impossible. Time travel isn't possible. You can't change the past, because going into the past makes the past your future, and makes the present your past, and time is linear, so you can't change it, and that is the rules that we're establishing for this movie. Which, of course, means that this is where the movie goes off the rails. So since Tony Stark isn't willing to help them, they go with the next best option, which is Professor Hulk. Small problem when it comes to Professor Hulk, and this is really nitpicky, but every time he's on screen, he's wearing a completely different outfit. It's all in the same day, but he changes clothes like every 5 minutes, I guess. What's up with that? But he agrees to help them with time travel, which leads to some really hilarious scenes where they fail miserably at time travel. But meanwhile, Tony comes to the realization that maybe it is possible, and he decides to come back and help them after all. So we get the whole team together, we've devised a plan, we're going to go back, they've got just enough Pym particles to travel back in time once and come back once, so we have to get this right on the first try, which of course we know that's not going to happen, but they split up and they go their separate ways in time. The first team goes back to New York during the events of the first Avengers movie because there were 3 Infinity Stones in New York at the same time at that time. Thor and Rocket go to Asgard during the events of the Dark World to get the Reality Stone from a stock footage Natalie Portman and a body double of Natalie Portman from the neck down where... Nebula and War Machine go off to Morag to get the Power Stone before Star-Lord shows up and does his dance routine to steal the Power Stone. And then, of course, Black Widow and Hawkeye go off to Vormir to get the Soul Stone. And this is where everything that was good about this movie breaks apart entirely. When they first arrive in New York, Professor Hulk goes to get the Time Stone from Doctor Strange. However, he runs into the Ancient One who tells him he's about 5 years too early to talk to Stephen Strange, and she's wearing the Time Stone. Professor Hulk tells her that he needs that and tells her why, which she then says is impossible. She even draws it out, draws a line in magic, a straight line, and says, this straight line is time. This is time. It's linear. You can't break it, because if you change something, then a branch breaks off, and now you have a completely new reality. You're creating multiverses, essentially. To which their answer is, not if we bring the stones back and replace them from the specific moment that we took them, after we're done. Then time continues on this linear line. Which, the irony here is them going back in the first place has already created a branch, but I digress. So initially she refuses to give him the time stone until he tells her that Doctor Strange gave the time stone willingly to Thanos. So that leads her to say, maybe I made a mistake. Is this mistake that she's thinking now that Doctor Strange isn't the one? I don't know. It doesn't get explained. But she gives it to him, and off he goes. Meanwhile, the other two, the Mind Stone and the Tesseract, which is the Space Stone, are both at Stark Tower. So Tony and Cap and Ant-Man, they show up at the exact moment that Loki has been captured at the end of the Avengers. So S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up, and they take Loki's scepter, and they put it into a case, and they go into the elevator with it. Then meanwhile, the Avengers, they all get onto another elevator, and they all going down, and there's this funny moment where they tell Hulk that he can't get on the elevator, so he has to take the stairs, which he's not happy about. So Captain America, that being, we'll call him New Cap, as he's the future Cap, then gets onto the elevator, and we have a nice little Easter egg moment where he gets the scepter from the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, which is basically Crossbones, that guy, and because he leans in and he says, "Hail Hydra." So we have a nice little nod to the Hydra Cap moment from the comics and stuff. But anyway, so Cap now has the scepter, and he walks off the elevator to see 2012 Captain America, who thinks he is Loki. So now New Cap and Old Cap fight. Because that's not changing history at all, right? Sure. The way that they get out of this, Old Cap actually gets New Cap in a headlock, and he's choking him out, and New Cap manages to say, "Bucky is alive!" So New Cap, or Old Cap rather, lets him go, and then New Cap knocks Old Cap out. Are you confused yet? So now we have the Time Stone, we have the Mind Stone. Meanwhile, Tony is downstairs about to get the Tesseract when all of a sudden Hulk comes out and knocks it out of his hands, and the Tesseract goes sliding across the floor, and Loki picks it up and escapes through a portal. So now the Tesseract is gone. Loki gets away, so he never had to go back to Asgard. So he didn't get killed by Thanos because he wasn't hanging out with Thor these last few years. I don't know. They don't explain that. So now they are without a space stone. So they're like, well, what do we do? I know. Instead of using these last remaining Pym particles to go back to the present, let's use them to go further back into the past and go to New Jersey, where we can not only pick up the Tesseract, but we can pick up some extra Pym particles. So Cap and Tony go back to New Jersey in the 70s to do that. Meanwhile, Tony gets a nice moment with his dad, and Cap gets to see Peggy for a moment. So we have a nice couple of touching moments there, which are great and nice, and some things kind of wrap up some of the previous movies and whatnot. But all in all, they get the Tesseract and they make their way out of there. So now the Tesseract was taken in the 70s, which means that it wasn't there for the events of Captain Marvel, so the Skrull are screwed. It means that Loki never got his hands on it, which means that he never attacked New York, which means pretty much none of this has ever happened, and my head hurts. Cut over to Asgard, and Thor sees his mom. So they have a nice touching moment. It's like everyone gets to have a nice family moment where they get to kind of have some closure on some past moments, which that's great. It ties up some loose ends and whatnot. Gives us some touching moments. It's all good. They get the reality stone and they move on. However, then we cut back to Vormir, and well, we all know what has to happen in order to get the Soul Stone, and long story short, goodbye Black Widow. Cut over to Morag, they knock out Star-Lord during his little dance number, they get the Power Stone, War Machine pops back into the future, but right as Nebula's about to do so, suddenly she gets this horrible pain in her head and she passes out. Cut to past Thanos. And Nebula somehow is accessing new Nebula's mind visual banks, and so they see what's happening, and since they can access all of her memories and stuff, they know the whole plan. So they kidnap Nebula and steal her Pym particles for themselves. So old Nebula takes the place of new Nebula and returns to the present, and she's infiltrating, and they've got all the stones, and they put them together, and Professor Hulk puts on the gauntlet, and it like turns his arm to crap. It like burns up his arm and burns up his face and everything, and he snaps his fingers, and all the dusted return to life. 5 years later, Hawkeye's wife calls him on the phone, so to kind of tell us everyone's back, but meanwhile, Thanos uses the last of the Pym particles to shrink his ship and come through the quantum realm and appear in Avengers HQ and expands and it blows up all of Avengers HQ and everybody lives somehow. But that's okay, because that leads us to epic fight scene. So everyone starts fighting Thanos and everyone's getting their butts kicked. And one thing I forgot to mention was when Thor was in Asgard, he took Mjolnir back. So Thor, around the time of the Dark World, no longer had his hammer for several years, apparently. I guess. I don't know how that changed the events of the end of Dark World or Ragnarok or Age of Ultron or any of that, but yeah. So they're fighting Thanos and they're getting their butts kicked, and then this awesome scene happens where Cap picks up Mjolnir and Thor's like, I knew it. And which was kind of a nice callback to Age of Ultron, where he almost picked it up, but he was, I don't know. So we get to have that epic scene. So anyway, they're fighting, and then we hear, Cap, can you hear me? On your left. And all these portals open, and all the Dusted come back, and the Wakandans attack, and all these armies and hundreds of people show up, and like every character we've ever seen in an MCU movie all show up, and there's this amazing scene. And I will admit, it is absolutely amazing to see all of those characters show up, and they're all attacking, and Thanos has his armies coming in, and the Avengers are all coming in, and then they're all fighting, and it's like this 35-minute long game of keep away. So the Infinity Gauntlet, meanwhile, or the Stark Gauntlet, if you will, passes from person to person to person, and Spider-Man gets it at one point, and there was kind of a confusing scene, confusing because I don't know what the purpose of this was, but so he's about to get killed, and so he gets dropped down, and all of a sudden, like, all of the women, like, just the female characters, and like all of the female characters, like, gather around, and they're like, we got this. And I don't know why they did that. Like, there were no guys there at all. And it was just, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with doing that. It was just weird. Like, it was an odd choice for them to make. But anyway, so everyone has their kind of epic moment, their epic, you know, that one shot that just really shows off how awesome each character is, even the Dusted ones. You know, Scarlet Witch gets to come up and she really kicks Thanos' butt there for a minute. And everybody gets to have one of those scenes. And in the end, Thanos actually gets the gauntlet. Oh, Captain Marvel shows back up, by the way, and she blows up Thanos' ship. So she's back. She's back. Thanos gets the gauntlet, and he puts it on. And he's about to snap his finger. He explains that this time around, he's actually going to wipe out the entire universe. He's like, obviously, wiping out half of humanity didn't work, so I'm going to destroy the entire universe and create a new one at the same time that doesn't know what they lost, only what they were given. And, you know, basically he was right again. Anyway, they want to stop him from doing that, obviously, because, well, they're part of this universe that would be wiped out. And so right as Thanos is about to snap his fingers, Tony looks over at Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange reminds him, one out of 14,605,000,000. So Tony attacks Thanos and kind of is trying to stop him from snapping his fingers, and Thanos swats him away, and then he snaps his fingers, except nothing happens, and he turns the gauntlet over, and all the stones are gone. Flip over to Tony, and Tony has all the stones. So Tony has his epic moment where he says, "I am Iron Man," and he snaps his fingers, and Thanos and all of his armies, all of his minions, everything, they all turn to dust. And the day is saved, presumably. Except that it isn't. This was the Thanos of 2014. And this is taking place in 2023. Which means Thanos ceased to be 9 years ago. So he never collected the Infinity Stones. So he never dusted everybody. So he never... None of this ever happened. So let's go back to what the Ancient One said. Time is linear and you can't change the past because then you create a branch that's a new reality. And yet, them going back to the past initially created a branch. Loki escaping created several branches. Pretty much everything that happened in this movie created a new branch. But the biggest one being, if Thanos from 2014 is dusted in 2023, then he never attacked to begin with, and the events of Infinity War never happened. So the whole movie just creates a giant paradox. A huge, gaping hole of a paradox. Now, in one of the previous films, I want to say it was Doctor Strange, and I want to say it was the Ancient One that said it, it was mentioned that there is a multiverse, which means that there are parallel universes where everyone lives on each of these universes and things just happen slightly differently. That's a thing. And changing the past creates one of these new little branches, simply creates a new reality within the multiverse. And that is fine, except for the fact that this movie specifically stated that its rules were you cannot change the past, and you cannot have these branches. You can't do that. That is the specific rules that this movie set for itself. And it broke those rules over and over and over again. And it doesn't even stop there. I mean, the movie even finishes with Captain America going back to put the stones back in their place so that somebody else can just gather them, because apparently now multiple people know where they are. But anyway, he stays there. So, literally none of the other Avengers movies have happened. You see what I'm getting at here? It bothers me. It bothers me to such an extent that it makes my head hurt. I mean, all they would have had to do would be to have Doctor Strange at some point in time after he came back just simply say something along the lines of, yes, we screwed up history, but we've simply created new realities within the multiverse. If he would have said something along those lines, okay, great, problem solved. Problem completely solved. But instead of doing that, they specifically made it a rule of you cannot change the past. And then they broke that rule as the plot of the movie. This bothers me to such a great extent that I simply can't get past it, and it's ruining the movie for me. And I hate that, because I really want to enjoy this movie. I really do. It was 3 hours long. It didn't feel like it was 3 hours long. It felt like it was an hour and a half. It went by so fast because I was that into it. But upon reflecting, when I realized all these little problems, and there's so many more, that's just the big, gaping, huge problem that the movie created, that I simply couldn't get over that one big thing, that it broke its own rules. But if I come up with another thing that bothers me to such an extent, I'm sure I'll do a video on it. So anyway, guys, I'm going to stop rambling. What do you think? Am I completely insane for thinking these things? Should I just shut up and ignore it? I can't do that, but you're welcome to your opinion. Anyway, what do you guys think? Put it down in the comments below. Remember to comment, like, share, and subscribe. And hopefully I'm feeling better by the next time I do a video, because I'm officially losing my voice now. Yeah, so thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you soon.